No, no, not this one. Grace!
Daniel, leave it. Leave the wood. Come out.
This is everything, Grace. This is all of it.
We'll rebuild it. We always rebuild it.
With what?
Mommy, my chest hurts again.
Michael.
He's burning up. Grace, the clinic. We need the clinic.
We don't have it, Daniel. We don't have the money.
Why? Why does an honest man work his whole life with his hands and still watch his son suffer? You are a skilled man. But skill alone will not make you wealthy.
Daniel said nothing. The man in the doorway did not move to leave. He simply waited, the way a man waits when he already knows the answer before the question has finished being asked. Daniel finally found his voice. "Who are you?" "Someone who noticed you," the stranger said. "My name is Victor." He stepped into the ruined workshop as if the collapsed roof, the soaked wood, the splintered cabinet meant nothing to him at all. His shoes did not sink into the mud, pooling across the floor. His clothes did not darken with the rain still dripping through the torn ceiling above him. He moved through the wreckage the way a man moves through a room he already owns, unhurried, entirely at ease. Daniel would remember that detail for the rest of his life. He simply didn't know it yet. Victor ran a hand along the broken edge of a table Daniel had spent 3 weeks building, sanded smooth, joints cut by hand, now split down the center where the roof had come down on it. "Fine work," he said. "Wasted. Now, I'll rebuild it." With what? The question landed the way a blade lands, quiet, and already inside you before you feel it. Daniel didn't answer. He didn't have an answer. Victor let the silence sit for a long moment before speaking again, his voice unhurried, almost gentle, the voice of a man who had rehearsed patience until it no longer needed rehearsing. "There are other ways to become rich," he said. "Ways that don't depend on rain, or customers who forget to pay, or wood that rots in a storm before you can sell it. Ways that don't leave a man on his knees in the mud, salvaging what little remains of a life that was never going to be enough, no matter how hard he worked at it." Daniel had heard words like these before. Every town had a story like this one, whispered over cups of palm wine, told with lowered voices and glances over the shoulder. A neighbor who grew wealthy overnight, his fortunes changing in a single season. A businessman whose success no one could ever fully explain, no matter how closely they looked into it. Rumors of secret rituals, sacrifices offered in silence, in places decent people did not go. Bargains struck in the dark, and never spoken of again by the men who struck them. He had always told himself he would never be foolish enough to listen to such things, no matter how bad his luck turned. "I'm not interested," Daniel said. Victor only smiled, the same faint, unhurried smile that never seemed to reach anywhere else on his face, as though it lived there alone, separate from whatever he was actually feeling underneath it. "You don't have to decide today." He said it the way another man might comment on the weather. No pressure behind it, no urgency, as though the offer would simply sit there in the air of the workshop indefinitely, waiting for Daniel to walk past it enough times that it stopped looking strange to him. Daniel studied the stranger's face for anything that might explain him. A scar, a tell, some small human imperfection that would make the man in front of him easier to place, easier to dismiss. He found nothing. Victor's face gave away exactly as much as he intended it to, not a fraction more. "I don't even know what you're offering," Daniel said finally, hating himself a little for asking at all, for giving the question room to exist between them instead of shutting the door on it outright. "Not yet," Victor agreed, "but you will, when you're ready to hear it properly." Men rarely are the first time. And then he turned and walked out into the night, and the storm that had refused to touch him closed silently behind him, swallowing the sound of his footsteps almost instantly, as if the darkness itself had been waiting to take him back. Daniel stood alone in his broken workshop for a long time, water dripping steadily around him, the wind finally beginning to die down outside. He told himself it was nothing, a strange man, a strange offer, and nothing more than that. He had work to do, a roof to patch, tools to salvage, a family waiting for him at home who needed him whole, not shaken by the words of some passing stranger. But the idea had already found a way inside him, the way smoke finds its way through the smallest gap beneath a door, and ideas like that do not leave quietly once they've settled somewhere warm. The weeks that followed were the hardest of Daniel's life. He went from house to house, workshop to workshop, asking for work, asking for loans, asking for anything at all that might buy his family a little more time. Some doors opened, most did not. Some men who had once called him friend now found reasons not to meet his eyes when he passed. He borrowed from his cousin in the next town, a man who counted out the notes slowly, reluctantly, already worried aloud about when, or whether, he would ever see them again. He borrowed from Emeka, an old friend from childhood who could barely spare it himself, and who pressed the money into Daniel's hand without a word, unable to look at him while he did it, as though ashamed on Daniel's behalf. He went to Mr. Bankole, a moneylender, known throughout the district for a patience that ran thin fast, and signed his name to a debt he did not know how he would ever repay, the older man's eyes cold and businesslike the entire time. He sold 2 of his best chisels, the ones his own father had given him, worn smooth by decades of careful use, to a trader in the market, who examined them for a long moment, named a price Daniel knew was less than half their worth, and paid it anyway, because Daniel had no room left in him to argue. He went to old Mama Adaize, who ran the provisions store on the corner, and had known Daniel since he was a boy delivering firewood for pocket change. She counted out what little she could spare from the small tin box beneath her counter, pressing it into his palm with both of her hands, folding his fingers closed around it. "Pay me back whenever God provides," she told him, not before. He went to the church, where the pastor prayed over him at length and offered what the congregation's welfare basket could give, which was food enough for a week, not medicine enough for a month. He went to a former customer, a government clerk who had once paid Daniel handsomely for a set of cabinets, and who now looked at him with the particular discomfort of a man watching someone else's misfortune up close, and quietly thanking God it wasn't his own turn. He even swallowed his pride and went to Chief Adewale, the wealthiest landowner in the district, a man who had once turned down Daniel's own father for a loan decades earlier, and never let anyone forget he'd been right to do so. The chief listened to Daniel's request from behind a wide mahogany desk, tapping his fingers slowly against the wood, and finally offered a sum so small it felt less like help than like a reminder of exactly where Daniel stood in the world. "Times are hard for everyone," the chief said, not quite meeting his eyes. "You understand." Daniel understood. He thanked the man anyway, because pride was a luxury he could no longer afford, and walked the long road home, turning the insult over and over in his mind, until it stopped feeling sharp, and simply felt heavy instead. He tried the bank in the next town as well, filling out forms in careful handwriting, waiting 3 hours on a hard bench, only to be told, politely, that a man with no collateral and no steady income was not a man the bank could risk lending to, storm or no storm. Grace, without telling him at first, began taking in laundry from 3 families on their street, scrubbing clothes by hand late into the night, after Michael had finally settled, her knuckles raw by morning, her back aching in a way she hid well enough that Daniel didn't notice for almost a week. When he found out, he tried to make her stop, ashamed that his wife had to carry this too, but she only shook her head and kept scrubbing. "We're in this together," she told him, not looking up from the basin. "You don't get to carry it alone just because you feel you should." Their neighbor, a widow named Comfort who lived 2 doors down, began quietly leaving small parcels of food on their step some mornings. A few yams, a handful of dried fish, never announcing it, never asking to be thanked, simply doing what she could for a family she'd watched struggling through her window. Daniel found out it was her, only by accident, catching her setting the parcel down one dawn, and the 2 of them stood there a moment in silence, neither quite willing to make it a bigger thing than it already was. "Your father helped bury my husband all those years ago, and never once let me pay him for the coffin," Comfort said finally, when the silence stretched too long to leave unfilled. "I haven't forgotten it. Some debts, you don't wait to be asked to repay." She patted his arm once and walked back toward her own gate before he could find the words to thank her properly, leaving him standing there with the small parcel in his hands and an ache in his chest he hadn't expected. Word travels fast in a small town, and it did not take long for people to begin talking. Daniel caught the whispers sometimes, walking past the market stalls, a lowered voice here, a glance exchanged there, conversations that stopped a half-second too late as he came within earshot. On market day, Daniel laid out the last of what he owned on a threadbare cloth at the edge of the square. A hand plane, a set of carving knives, a small radio Grace had been given as a wedding gift. He sat behind them through the heat of the afternoon, watching neighbors he had known his whole life walk past without stopping, or stop only long enough to offer a price that insulted the years of work behind each tool. By evening he had sold almost everything, and counted the notes twice with trembling hands, already knowing before he finished counting that it still would not be enough to cover what the week ahead would demand of him. He walked home in the dark that night carrying an empty cloth where his tools had been, and for the first time in his life, Daniel understood what it meant to feel his own hands were worthless, not because they lacked skill, but because the world around him had simply run out of ways to pay for what they could do. Still, it was not enough. None of the borrowing, none of the selling, none of it changed the numbers waiting for him at home each evening. It was never quite enough, and the gap between what he had and what his family needed only seemed to widen, no matter how many doors he knocked on. Michael's fever came and went, but never fully left him. Some mornings the boy woke laughing, chasing the neighbor's dog around the compound, his small wooden toy clutched tightly in one hand, the animal Daniel had carved for him one slow evening years before, worn smooth now from constant handling. Other mornings he couldn't rise from the mat at all, his breath shallow and fast, his small body burning with a heat that no cool cloth seemed able to touch for more than a few minutes at a time. Grace sat beside him through the worst of those nights, pressing a damp rag to his forehead, whispering the same songs their own mothers had once sung to them both, her voice steady even when her hands were not. Daniel watched from the doorway, useless, his hands, his skilled, capable hands, hands that could turn raw timber into anything a person could imagine, unable to fix the one thing that mattered more than all of it combined. Old Baba Tunde, who had outlived 3 wives and claimed to remember every strange happening the town had seen in 60 years, stopped Daniel one afternoon outside the market, gripping his arm with surprising strength for a man his age. "They say a stranger has been seen near your workshop," the old man said, his voice low, glancing once over his own shoulder before continuing. "A tall man, fine clothes, never sweats, they say, even at midday, even walking the same dusty road the rest of us are choking on." Daniel felt his stomach tighten. "I don't know what you mean." Baba Tunde studied him for a long moment, the way old men study things they have seen before and had hoped never to see again in their lifetime. There are men like that, he said finally, who come to towns like ours only when someone is desperate enough to listen to them. I buried a friend once who listened to a man just like the one they're describing. He got everything he ever wanted. Carpenter. Everything. Then, in the